small Spanish mission sits on a flat, open plain in Texas. Its walls are thin adobe brick, never meant to stop cannon fire. Inside, 189 men are trapped. They are ranchers, frontiersmen, lawyers, and volunteers who have never fought in a coordinated army together. Outside, the horizon turns blue and red as an empire's professional army marches into view. There are thousands of them. They have siege artillery, cavalry, and a commander who has raised a blood-red flag above the town church. That flag means one thing: no quarter, no prisoners will be taken. Every man inside who does not surrender immediately will be put to the sword. And then the commander outside orders a cannon shot fired at the mission walls to demand their surrender. Inside the compound, a 26-year-old lawyer from South Carolina walks to the largest cannon they have, a massive 18-pounder aimed at the town. He takes a burning match, touches it to the touch hole, and fires an iron ball right back at the enemy camp. It is not just an answer, it is a death sentence. The men inside know no army is coming to save them in time. They know their walls will eventually crumble under heavy bombardment. But for 13 days, those 189 men will hold a crumbling church against an army of thousands, buying the time needed to save an entire revolution. This is the real, gritty, tactical story of the Alamo. Not the polished myth of invincible legends, but the visceral reality of desperate men who looked at an overwhelming army, understood the mathematical certainty of their own death, and refused to run. By early 1836, the northern frontier of Mexico was tearing itself apart. Texas was then a vast, sparsely populated territory of Mexico. For years, American settlers had poured across the border, bringing their own customs, their own rifles, and an independent streak that clashed violently with the central government in Mexico City. When General Antonio López de Santa Anna abolished the Mexican Constitution of 1824 and concentrated absolute military power in his own hands, rebellion exploded across the frontier. In the autumn of 1835, Texan volunteer forces had driven the small Mexican garrison out of the town of San Antonio de Béxar. When they captured the town, they also captured a sprawling, dilapidated Spanish mission on the east bank of the San Antonio River, the Alamo. Most Texan leaders, including the newly appointed commander of the Texas Army, General Sam Houston, looked at the Alamo and saw a death trap. It was too big for a small garrison to defend. Its walls were crumbling adobe, surrounded by open ground that favored an attacking army. Houston gave clear orders: strip the fortress of its valuable artillery, blow up the fortifications, and retreat east to join the main army. But military orders on the frontier were merely suggestions. The men sent to inspect the Alamo looked at the cannons, looked at the road leading into Texas from the south, and made a fateful calculation. If the Mexican army captured San Antonio without a fight, they would have an open highway into the heart of Texas settlements. The Alamo was the key to the frontier, so instead of destroying the mission and running, a handful of stubborn commanders decided to hold it. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to step into one of the most famous and brutal siege stands in military history: the garrison and the leaders. The garrison that fortified the Alamo in February 1836 was one of the most unusual collections of soldiers ever assembled. There were no standard uniforms. There was no military drill. They were a mix of Anglo-American settlers, Tejano fighters, native-born Mexicans of Texas who opposed Santa Anna's dictatorship, and European immigrants seeking land and adventure. Command of the garrison was split between two very different men, creating friction from the very first day. Leading the regular Texan Army detachment was 26-year-old Lieutenant Colonel William Barret Travis. Highly educated, ambitious, and fiercely formal, Travis was a man obsessed with military honor and duty. He wanted discipline, strict order, and precise preparation. Leading the frontiersmen and volunteers was James Bowie, a living legend of the American Southwest, famous for his deadly knife fights, land speculation, and fearless reputation among the local population. Bowie commanded the loyalty of the volunteers who refused to take orders from a stiff regular army officer like Travis. And then, just days before the siege began, another legendary figure rode through the mission gates. David Crockett of Tennessee, a former United States congressman and famed frontiersman. Crockett arrived with a small group of sharpshooting Tennessee volunteers. Despite his international fame, Crockett refused an offer of military command, telling Travis he simply wanted a rifleman's post among the common soldiers. For weeks, Travis and Bowie argued over strategy and authority, but that rivalry evaporated on the morning of February 23rd, 1836. Scouts galloped into the compound with chilling news. The Mexican vanguard was not weeks away, as they had calculated. They were just miles down the road. The hammer arrives, Santa Anna's forced march. General Santa Anna was a formidable commander who understood the psychological power of speed. Instead of waiting for spring grass to feed his cavalry horses, he had force-marched an army of thousands across hundreds of miles of freezing desert. During one of the worst winters in memory, hundreds of his own soldiers had died of hypothermia, dysentery, and exhaustion along the trail. But the gamble worked. When the bright blue and white uniforms of the Mexican vanguard appeared on the plains outside San Antonio, the Texan garrison was caught completely by surprise. As Mexican troops occupied the town of Béxar across the river, the Texans scrambled into the Alamo compound, driving a few head of cattle through the gates and closing the heavy timber doors. Santa Anna wasted no time setting the stakes. From the tower of San Fernando Church in the center of town, his men hoisted a blood-red flag. In the military code of the 19th century, a red flag had a universally understood meaning: no quarter. If the garrison surrendered immediately, they might be spared. If they resisted, every single man inside would be executed. Travis answered with the 18-pounder cannon. The siege of the Alamo had officially begun. The anatomy of an imperfect fortress. To understand the 13-day standoff that followed, you have to understand the physical reality of the Alamo compound. It was not a medieval castle. It was a former religious mission designed to protect priests and local converts from raid attacks, not to withstand European-style artillery siege warfare. The compound was massive, covering nearly 3 acres of ground. To properly defend a perimeter of that size, a military engineer would require at least 1,000 trained soldiers. Travis had fewer than 200. The perimeter was a patchwork of weaknesses. The north wall was a low, crumbling adobe barrier exposed to enemy fire. The south wall contained the main wooden gate, reinforced by improvised ditches and timber palisades. The west wall was a series of old native huts and stone rooms with firing slits cut into the brick. The east side was dominated by the Alamo Church, a roofless stone building with walls 4 feet thick. Inside the ruined church, engineers had built a dirt ramp so cannons could fire over the exposed walls. The garrison had one distinct advantage: artillery. They possessed 21 cannons of various sizes, including the massive 18-pounder. But artillery requires gunpowder and shot, 2 resources that were strictly limited inside the walls. 13 days of psychological warfare. For the first week of the siege, Santa Anna relied on classical siege tactics and psychological exhaustion. Mexican engineers dug trenches under the cover of darkness, inching closer to the Alamo walls every night. By day, Mexican artillery batteries pounded the adobe walls, knocking away brick and stone. Every night, under the cover of darkness, Texan volunteers crawled outside the walls with shovels to rebuild the shattered defenses with dirt and timber. But the hardest weapon to fight wasn't iron cannonballs, it was sleep deprivation. Santa Anna ordered his military bands to play around the clock. By night, Mexican skirmishers fired random volleys at the walls, forcing the defenders to stand watch hour after hour, night after night. Cold northern winds swept across the compound. Rain turned the dirt courtyard into freezing mud. To make matters worse, the garrison's co-commander, James Bowie, collapsed from a severe illness, likely typhoid pneumonia or advanced tuberculosis. Bedridden in a small room along the south wall, Bowie was unable to stand, leaving the young William Barret Travis in sole military command of a desperate, sleep-deprived garrison. Travis's desperate pleas for help. Travis knew his walls could not hold forever without reinforcements. Night after night, he sent couriers slipping through the Mexican siege lines in the dark, carrying letters to Texan settlements and military commanders asking for relief. On February 24th, Travis wrote one of the most famous military letters in American history, addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. In simple, powerful English, he laid out their reality. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. He ended the letter with a phrase that would echo across the frontier: victory or death. The couriers miraculously made it through the enemy lines, but the help Travis expected never materialized. Texas was in political chaos. Sam Houston's main army was disorganized, unequipped, and hundreds of miles away. Only one group answered the call. On the night of March 1st, 32 men from the nearby town of Gonzales slipped silently through the Mexican siege lines in the dark and entered the Alamo gates. They were farmers, shopkeepers, and teenage boys. They knew the fort was surrounded by thousands of enemy troops. They knew they were walking into a death trap, but they walked in anyway to stand beside their friends. With the Gonzales 32, the garrison reached its final fighting strength, roughly 189 men. The line in the sand. By March 3rd, the Mexican siege trenches had pushed to within musket range of the north wall. Mexican artillery had smashed a visible breach in the adobe brick. That afternoon, a courier returned to the compound with devastating news from the outside world. No rescue army was coming. They were completely on their own, according to historical legend, and supported by accounts of survivors who left before the final battle. Travis called the entire garrison into the dusty courtyard. He explained the tactical situation clearly. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. No reinforcements would arrive. When the final assault came, the Mexicans would give no quarter. Travis drew his sword and scratched a long straight line into the Texas dirt. He told his men that anyone willing to stay and fight to the death should step across the line to stand with him. Anyone who wished to try and escape through the enemy lines under the cover of darkness was free to go with his blessing. One by one, the volunteers, the Tejanos, and the Tennessee riflemen stepped across the line. Even James Bowie, too weak to lift his head from his cot, reportedly ordered 4 soldiers to lift his mattress and carry him across Travis's line. Only one man, a French veteran named Louis Rose, chose not to step across. He climbed the wall that night and slipped into the darkness, surviving to tell the story of the garrison's final decision. For the remaining 189 men, the calculation was finished. Their job was no longer to win. Their job was to hold the Alamo as long as humanly possible, kill as many enemy troops as they could, and buy Sam Houston the time he needed to build an army. The final assault, March 6th, 1836, 5 a.m. On the 13th day of the siege, March 6th, 1836, Santa Anna decided to end the standoff. His senior officers argued against a costly infantry assault, pointing out that heavy siege cannons were only days away and could level the walls without losing a single soldier. But Santa Anna wanted a bloody, decisive victory to terrorize the rest of Texas into submission. At 5 a.m. in the freezing, pitch-black cold before sunrise, the Mexican camp went dead silent. The artillery bombardment that had rung out for 12 days suddenly stopped. Inside the compound, exhausted Texan soldiers fell into a deep, heavy sleep against the stone walls, deceived by the sudden silence. In the darkness outside, more than 1,800 elite Mexican assault troops crept across the frozen mud toward the Alamo walls. They carried scaling ladders, axes, and crowbars. They were divided into 4 massive columns designed to hit the north, south, east, and west walls. Simultaneously, they moved in absolute silence until an overeager Mexican soldier shouted, "Viva Santa Anna!" The cry was repeated by thousands of throats. Bugles shattered the morning darkness, sounding the dreaded call of the Deguelo, an ancient Spanish music call that signaled absolute destruction and no quarter for the enemy. The walls are breached. Inside the Alamo, Travis sprang from his cot, grabbed his shotgun and saber, and raced to the vulnerable north wall. "Come on, boys," he shouted into the darkness. "The Mexicans are upon us, and we'll give them hell." From the parapets, Texan artillerymen fired double-shotted cannons, loaded with scrap iron, nails, and horseshoe chains, directly into the advancing Mexican columns. At point-blank range, the carnage was catastrophic. Whole ranks of Mexican infantry were swept away in the dark. Tennessee riflemen along the walls fired with devastating accuracy. Because Texan soldiers had gathered 3 or 4 loaded rifles, each beside their defensive positions, they maintained a rate of fire that convinced Mexican commanders they were fighting a force twice their actual number. Twice, the Mexican assault columns attacking the north wall were shattered and pushed back by the sheer volume of iron and lead raining from the Alamo. But numbers are an unforgiving math. On the third charge, Santa Anna pushed his reserves into the fight. Driven forward by cavalry swords from behind, the Mexican columns swarmed the north wall. The defenders ran out of time to reload their cannons. Mexican soldiers clustered at the base of the adobe wall beneath the firing angle of the Texan guns and began raising wooden scaling ladders. William Barret Travis was one of the first to fall at the wall, struck square in the forehead by a musket ball as he fired his shotgun down into the attackers. The hand-to-hand slaughter. Once the first Mexican soldiers tumbled over the north wall, the perimeter defenses collapsed instantly. The Alamo was too vast. There were no men left to plug the breach. Texan defenders abandoned the outer walls and retreated into the interior compound, taking up positions inside the long barracks and the ruined church. What followed in the dim morning twilight was not a battle. It was a chaotic, room-to-room slaughter. Texan soldiers fired their rifles once, then used them as clubs. Mexican infantry poured into the courtyard, firing disciplined volleys into the doorways before charging in with bayonets. Inside his darkened sick room, James Bowie was trapped. Stories from Mexican soldiers later claimed the bedridden legend emptied his pistols into the first soldiers to enter his room before being pierced by half a dozen bayonets. In the courtyard, Texan artillerymen spun a cannon around to fire across the plaza, only to be overwhelmed and killed over their own guns. The last stand at the church. The final resistance took place inside the ruined walls of the Alamo Church. Here, among the sandbags and ammunition piles, a small group of defenders, including David Crockett and his Tennessee riflemen, made their last stand. Stripped of time to reload, they fought with hunting knives, tomahawks, and the heavy wooden stocks of their empty rifles. Mexican infantry brought up captured Texan cannons, aimed them at the heavy timber doors of the barracks and the church, and blew the barricades to splinters at point-blank range. By 6:30 a.m., just 90 minutes after the first bugle sounded in the dark, the firing inside the Alamo compound ceased. When the smoke cleared in the morning sun, not a single Texan combatant was left alive. 189 defenders lay dead across the courtyard, the barracks, and the church. Santa Anna had won his victory. But the cost was staggering. Between 600 and mostly likely up to 1,000 Mexican soldiers were dead or severely wounded, nearly a third of the assault force. The death trap of the Alamo had cost the Mexican army its most elite shock troops. The price of delay. When Santa Anna walked the blood-soaked courtyard of the Alamo that morning, he reportedly remarked that it was a small affair. He could not have been more wrong. The 13 days of the Alamo siege had completely altered the strategic reality of the Texas Revolution. By holding the Mexican army at San Antonio for nearly 2 weeks, Travis and his 189 men had bought the political leaders of Texas at the time they needed to meet at Washington on the Brazos and formally declare independence from Mexico. More importantly, it bought General Sam Houston 13 priceless days to gather, organize, and drill a real Texan army. Santa Anna ordered the bodies of the Alamo defenders piled in the courtyard and burned in massive funeral pyres, denying them a Christian burial. A few non-combatants, including Travis's enslaved servant Joe and several Tejano women and children, were spared and sent east to carry the news of Santa Anna's brutality to the Texan settlements. The revenge at San Jacinto. Instead of breaking the spirit of Texas, the slaughter at the Alamo ignited a firestorm of fury. 6 weeks later, on the afternoon of April 21st, 1836, General Sam Houston's Texan army caught Santa Anna's forces resting near the banks of the San Jacinto River. As 900 Texan infantry and cavalry charged across the tall grass toward the Mexican camp, they did not scream standard military cheers. At the top of their lungs, they roared a slogan that would become immortal: "Remember the Alamo." The Battle of San Jacinto lasted 18 minutes. Santa Anna's army was completely destroyed. The dictator himself was captured the next day, hiding in the marsh grass, and was forced to sign treaties recognizing the independence of the Republic of Texas. An empire had lost a territory because 189 men in a crumbling mission had refused to run. The Siege of the Alamo is often buried under layers of romantic folklore and Hollywood movies, but when you strip away the myth, the real tactical story is even more remarkable. The defenders of the Alamo were not superheroes. They were ordinary, flawed men, squabbling commanders, frontiersmen with questionable pasts, and local farmers who were terrified of the army marching toward them. They knew their walls were too thin. They knew their garrison was too small. They knew that staying meant certain death. Yet, in the cold logic of frontier warfare, they understood that someone had to stand in the doorway. Someone had to absorb the first blow of the hammer so the rest of the nation could survive. For 13 days, 189 men held an undefensible church against an army of thousands. They fought without relief, without sleep, and ultimately without hope of survival. Bound together by nothing more than a line scratched in the dirt and a shared refusal to retreat. Perhaps that is why the Alamo remains one of history's most powerful symbols of defiance. It reminds us that in war, the greatest victories are not always won by the armies that survive. Sometimes history is shaped by the stubborn few who look at impossible odds, stand their ground and fight until the very last cartridge is gone.